welcome. Today, my guest is Kirill Boychenko. He's from Russia, and he came to the United States to study human rights at the University of Minnesota Law School, and he has been here since last August 2011, and I'm so happy that you made it and you were here with me, so we can talk a little bit about your country and human rights. First, I would like to start by asking you, what do you do in your country? He has very super cool work, so I would like to know, explain to us, what do you do there?
Yes, hi Katya. Thank you very much for inviting. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you and to speak. And I'm a legal practitioner. I work on prevention of human trafficking in Russia, and I have been doing that for quite a while. I would say about 10 years. That's 10 years ago I started to work on this subject.
Today you work for an organization?
It's called International Organization for Migration. It's an intergovernmental agency, and there are offices all over the world. Mm-hmm. There is one in Moscow.
You work there?
That's where I work. I know that there are two offices here in the United States, one in New York and another one is in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys exactly do there? It's just one problem that you help, or you work in different... I know it's migration, but what kind of work do you develop exactly there?
There are many programs and projects that IOM is working worldwide, and there are many topics, but usually our topics are linked to migration. So it's not just work on prevention of human trafficking, it is also labor migration, family reunion, resettlement, help during the crisis and emergencies. So there are many different topics, but those topics are linked to migration.
I understand that you are expert in human trafficking, and I would like to start asking you, is there a difference in human trafficking, in labor trafficking and sex trafficking? Is this too silly?
No, what you just said is basically forms of human trafficking, but for different exploitation purposes. So human trafficking can be for purpose of sexual exploitation or labor exploitation or forced begging, for example. There could be some other forms of human trafficking, like trafficking in children or removal of organs, trafficking in organs, in tissues.
I would like to know if the government is equally vigorous in pursuing labor trafficking and sex trafficking.
Well, in Russia we have this problem of human trafficking, and it started basically after the collapse of USSR. That's when borders were open, people would travel freely, and they were also exposed to new criminal activities, and including human trafficking. And first who started to deal with human trafficking were our non-governmental organizations. Now Russian government is more and more trying to fight against human trafficking, but first were non-governmental organizations. And they would focus their work on sexual exploitation. So there is more, let's say, expertise on prevention of human trafficking for sexual exploitation. And there is not so much experience on work with labor exploitation. I would say that a new phenomenon, a growing problem for Russia is human trafficking for labor exploitation. We have more and more migrants who are coming to Russia. They would like to stay, they would like to study, to work. And just to give you an example, the #1 country for migration in the world is the United States, and it's widely known. but it's not so much known that Russia is #2 country in the world for migration.
You mean to receive people
Yes.
from other countries to Russia?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We have very many people who are coming, and mostly they are coming from former constituent USSR republics. So that would be neighboring countries and countries from the region. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that we've been one country. People speak Russian. So language is one of the factors.
It's easy to go to a country where you are able to speak the same language.
Exactly, yes. And we have rather transparent borders. You can freely travel, let's say, from Ukraine to Russia, or from Moldova, or from Tajikistan, or Uzbekistan. Both nationals of each country can freely travel back and forth. So labor migration is growing, and there are crimes that connected to labor migrations. About 75% of migrants, they're coming from former USSR republics. And again, if you compare with the United States, with the long history of migration, you will see that United States has any kind of migration. A labor migration, seasonal migration, brain drain, you name it.
What is brain drain?
That's when people, highly educated specialists, they are coming from sometimes less developed countries, but not necessary, but it's usually like this, they're coming to more developed countries. And countries who are receiving these brain specialists, they are trying to provide all necessary that they would be coming, because country is interested in receiving more migrants who are specialists, who are professionals, who have certain skills, they're ready to work.
But those people, you know, who are ready to work and who have this kind of skills, those people cannot be victim, or can? Of
Unfortunately, yes. They also can be victims. But in our case, the majority of migrants who are coming, and these flows of migration we call a muscle migration. That means that people who are coming, they are not necessarily skilled professionals, but they are ready for physical work. They are ready for hard work. It's not necessary that they have a certain profession, but they would like to work and send money to their home families. Sometimes they are desperate, and those migrants are especially under risk of becoming trafficking victims. But as you mentioned, anyone can become a victim of
men or women? Men and women?
Yes, both. First,
even sex trafficking, both can be.
Sex trafficking, more young boys are affected. I mean,
oh my!
The risk groups are women and children. But if you try to compare the genders of victims, then it would be women, girls, and boys. Adult men are not so much subject to human trafficking for sexual exploitation. They are more victims of labor exploitation, forced begging, could be removal or trafficking in organs.
Do you think the officials in the government understand the nature of trafficking?
From my perspective, I believe that there is not enough understanding among our officials, because sometimes the statistics is very confusing. For example, Ministry of Interior of Russia, our police, is stating that we have 60 or from 60 to 100 cases on human trafficking initiated, opened annually. And if you know a population of a large country like Russia, and that's 143 million people, and you think, oh, in 1 year you have only 60 to 100 cases on human trafficking, so the problem must not be very important. And this is a completely wrong understanding, and from that we have many problems, because this is a very hidden, it's a latent crime. And if you treat it in this way, it becomes even more hidden, and it will be hard to investigate such cases. It would be hard to provide assistance to trafficking victims. So in my understanding, it is very important to look at real numbers, and real numbers are completely different. In 1 year, we have 6,000 to 7,000 crime in the sphere of human trafficking. And this is also an official statistics, but it's not coming from Russian police. It is coming from public prosecutor's office. So for some reason, we have these different statistics. The reason why the numbers are different is because police is counting only those cases that are under one criminal code article, which is human trafficking. They're not counting other articles.
Anything else?
Yes, but if you look at the problem of human trafficking, it's not only what is stated in one article. It could be organization of a prostitution, because it's connected to sexual exploitation, organization of a brothel, pornography, sometimes illegal migration. If you take all of these articles of the criminal code and you count the crimes that we have annually, you will have 7,000. So I can give you statistics for 5 years. From 2004 to 2008, we had about 25,000 crimes on human trafficking. So if you look at this problem from this angle, you understand that it's very urgent. Start doing more and more to prevent human trafficking.
The way you explain it's so clear to me, and I understood. And of course, you know, it's not because you were saying that I know everything, but so my question for you was if the government understands the nature of the trafficking, and it takes a little while for them to understand. What do you think it's necessary for them to learn more and understand better and to prevent better? You know, what is between them and the prevention, or better prevention, I would say?
Sometimes the link between the government and non-governmental organization is broken. Sometimes there is lack of information and data. For example, our officials believe that 80% of all human trafficking cases connected to sexual exploitation and connected to prostitution. The attitude towards prostitution is very different. Some people think it should be legalized. Some people think it should be banned. But we are not talking about
prostitution. It's crime in Russia?
In Russia,
they prostitute?
Prostitution, it's sort of a gray market phenomenon. There is a criminal code article for organization of the prostitution, or engaging someone or forcing someone for prostitution, to provide prostitution services. But at the same time, a prostitute can get a fine under our administrative code. So it's in between, and it still raises many questions. It's a controversial topic, and people look at it very differently. That's why we had many problems with our governmental officials from the beginning, because they were considering human trafficking to be a fancy terminology for sexual services, a prostitution. And they would say, prostitutes, they do it on their own will. This is their choice.
It's not crime.
Why should we interfere? That was their position. But we believe that there are many, many cases when prostitution is forced. And it's very hard to define. And it's important that the government and non-governmental organizations are trying to help these people and trying to stop those sexual services that are forced, those when it's coercion, when it's violence. And it's important to deal with that. And just to come back to your question, yes. So the government would believe that 80% of all crimes connected to prostitution. But these statistics does not reflect the real situation. For example, we had a rehabilitation center in Moscow. It was open from 2006 to 2009. Now it's unfortunately closed. But during that time, we were able to provide help to over 240 victims of human trafficking. And our statistics show that 53% are victims of sexual exploitation, where 44% are victims of forced labor. And you can see that the numbers are almost even. We have a very big percentage of victims for labor exploitation. Human trafficking is not only about sexual exploitation. We also had 3% of forced begging, and this is very dangerous crime. It's also very hidden. We had some cases that it's difficult to describe because it's such a severe form of exploitation of a person.
Do you think your government has prosecuted and convicted people who were accused of trafficking in your country? Do you think has been a good work in this punishment?
There were some very successful cases, and at the same time, I believe it's not enough. It seems that...
Why?
It seems that like law enforcement,
there are too little people to... the judiciary is not big enough to handle these, or the police is not getting enough of the groups. Because I understand that it's a bigger thing. It's not just a small, or it's usually organized crimes.
Exactly. And
so do you think they are bigger than the government and the non-government organizations who are there to prevent?
They are certainly faster. And they adjust.
Oh, that's horrible.
They adjust to the current state of affairs. They adjust to the legislation. They know what's going on. They're fast to change their activities. They replace each other very fast. If you get one trafficker, it replaced very quickly. It's important to dismantle the whole criminal group, to freeze their activities, to freeze their assets. And it's not easy because this crime is very hidden. It's hard to have victims testify.
Why?
Against traffickers. That's a great question, and the answer for that is because the good referral mechanism, the good system for providing support to victims of human trafficking is not there. What we have is not enough because there are many victims of human trafficking that are neglected. There is not enough support to them. There should be specialized shelters or rehabilitation centers open for victims of human trafficking, specifically for them. And if we don't have that, how is that possible that a person who was trafficked would go and testify if he or she has
fear
to
be found again and being...
And without any support.
Yes. And usually they can escape, or sometimes they don't escape. So, because you just can have theoretically witness if she or he escape and is free eventually. But is there cases where they don't escape and they stay there forever, or they are killed? What happened? They are kept forever as sex victims or slaves? How does it work?
Every story is very different, and sometimes it happens that people who are trafficked, they stay with their trafficking for a very long time and they get abused and exploited years and years on. Sometimes they manage to escape, or they were rescued because of a successful operation. And now we're talking about organized crime, and we're talking about international trafficking, because we also have internal domestic trafficking within one country. And unfortunately, we have this problem too. When, for example, girls are going from smaller cities or villages to a bigger cities, like our capitals, Moscow and St. Petersburg and other big cities, and they get exploited in the prostitution. Sometimes they don't receive any support. They're there until their traffickers had enough money, and they generate a lot of money. There are some studies that is being done on the economical part of this crime, and this crime generates millions and millions of dollars yearly.
These organizations, they eventually release their victims, or it's just the victims just stopped from being victims because they escape, or they die, or they are released eventually?
Those cases are very different. Sometimes traffickers would kill their victims.
When they are not interested anymore.
If they're not interested, because they're witnesses of many different crimes, and sometimes connected to trafficking of drugs, trafficking of weapons. They want to get rid of them. They can kill them. Otherwise, if a victim manages to escape, he or she sometimes never testifies because being afraid. And there should be a legal mechanism that would work for protection of witnesses and victims. So they will testify, they will go to a court. But what I'm trying to say is that the cases are very different. Sometimes they manage to escape, sometimes they've been killed, sometimes they were helped by their relatives or friends or embassies or non-governmental organizations. There are many stories that ended up in a good way, but there are many that ended up very bad.
I read some stories, and I bet everybody who were able to hear about something about sex trafficking or human trafficking or labor trafficking, they were able to hear the same. And even there are very good movies actually about giving just a hint of what happened in this case. But that some people were released, were, you know, and they in case their perpetrators talked to them and said, well, you were free but not very free if you tell anything about what you have been or what you have seen. We go back after you and after your family, and this time you won't survive. And you'd say that that's true. What we read and what we watch in movies, that's not very far from the reality.
Well, what you just described is not far from the reality. And it's important to understand how the recruitment process, how was it done? Because if a recruiter is a person who knew a girl or that man for a long time, or knew a family, knew the village where they were living, recruited them there, knowing where the family lives, they will forever threaten their victims, saying that we will take care of your family, we will kill your relatives, your kids, your parents. And that is a very strong reason for victims who are not able to escape. They're just afraid for their beloved ones.
And I do understand there is broken communication between the government and non-government organizations. And that's a pity, because when you have these interrelations, probably both work goes much faster and easier and smoother. But I wonder what takes for your government, and I cannot tell about the NGOs, but to create programs to give support to victims. Everything that you were saying, probably your government is aware, and all the NGOs who have all this endless and tireless work know. So what do you think, it's in your opinion, as Russian, as citizen, what does it take for them to create a better, to create a program or whatever it takes for them to create something in order to help these people?
Yes, well, I wouldn't say that communication between Russian government and Russian non-governmental organizations is completely broken.
There are some gaps, little gaps.
There are gaps, and being an advocate in this field, I think that this communication is not strong enough. I believe it should be enhanced, and there should be programs, governmental programs, that would bring attention to this issue, that would have information campaigns, not just non-governmental organizations that are doing these info campaigns, but also government, explaining the dangers, explaining what human trafficking is, how not to get involved. What do you do if you go abroad and you find yourself in a situation of slavery? What could you possibly do? All this should be done by the government. NGOs cannot take all responsibilities that are state responsibilities.
Yes.
So we're now, as practitioners, as people who are trying to stop human trafficking, we're saying that it's not enough, that many things should be enhanced. And a proper referral mechanism should be set up. If a victim is contacting an agency, a governmental agency, that agency should be able to refer victim to an appropriate structure where she or he would receive all necessary support, medical, psychological, financial. And at this moment, what we receive, what kind of response we receive, is that human trafficking victims are no different from victims of other crimes. They can just apply to a hospital or a polyclinic according to their place of residence. And we, people who work in this field, people who are who know the needs of trafficking victims, they understand that it is not possible for them just to apply to a hospital or a polyclinic. They have very special needs. They were sometimes tortured. They spent years being trafficked, raped, beaten, and many, many horrible things. They have special needs, and we believe that there should be a special referral mechanism with shelters, with rehabilitation centers where they would go. You cannot place trafficking victim to a center for domestic violence victims. You cannot place a victim to a rehab that is for people in crisis situation. They have special needs.
Yes.
And at this moment in Russia, there is only one rehabilitation center that is located in the city called Vladivostok. Vladivostok is located in the far east of Russia, not far from China and very close to Japan. And it takes you 9 hours to fly from Moscow to Vladivostok. And that shelter that was created because of our work at IUM Moscow, it was handed over to the local government in Vladivostok, and it's now there. It is working. They provide budget to run it, but it's
the government provide
local government has this center. They provide the budget, but it's only 6 persons that you can have there at the same time, and only females. How possibly can you imagine that a person from Moscow, it takes 9 hours to fly there. The ticket can cost you around $1,000. And if you have a victim in St. Petersburg, northwest of Russia, Moscow, if you have victim coming from Chechnya or Dagestan, you will send them to Vladivostok. This is impossible. This is not how it should work. There should be centers like this in many or all Russian regions, and not only for females, and not just for 6 persons.
Of course.
So this is one thing that we're trying to push and we're advocating. We need more centers, and those centers should be specialized.
I'm curious to know, does your government, does the Russian government has made a real effort in order to identify victims?
Russian government is having some progress year after year. We are started from not having not having anything on prevention of human trafficking, and in 2003 we had 2 articles to the Russian Criminal Code. One is on human trafficking, and another one is on forced labor. But our investigators, they still prefer not to use these articles, because it's very hard to deal with those articles. It's hard to prove the crime of human trafficking. So they would prefer take other articles like organization of a prostitution, pornography, similar. That's why we have this big discrepancy in our statistics. That's why we should look at the problem of human trafficking as a big problem, as a very complex problem that includes different crimes. So the sphere of human trafficking is a complex, it's a big sphere. So there are many things that should be done to identify victims, and it should be done by very many different governmental representations. Consulates and embassies should be involved in this work.
Why would you say that? Because international?
Because of international trafficking. It's very often, if you have a problem abroad, first, whom you're trying to contact? You're trying to contact your embassy. You lost your passport, something happening to you, there are criminal charges against you, you're trying to contact your embassy. If the embassy is reluctant to work with you, to help you, if they look at victim of human trafficking for sexual exploitation just like it's a prostitution, they will never support. There should be an understanding of this phenomenon, and it is not there. We don't have an understanding of this problem.
What do you mean we don't have an understanding of this problem? The international deal that happens in the embassies, that's what you were saying?
Human trafficking problem is neglected. Our officials, unfortunately, don't take care of the consequences of this problem. But this is very serious. It's very serious for our economy, demography. It's a crime against the state. It's a crime sometimes against our borders. We have people who are coming to our territory. It's not just Russian nationals who are trafficked somewhere. We have many people who are coming to Russia, and they find themselves in a situation of slavery. So the government should realize that fighting with human trafficking is one of the priorities. It's one of the priorities just for those reasons that I mentioned, because it's a very dangerous crime, both against the society, the people, and the state.
So you already said that no legal, medical, health, psychological services are provided for the victims, because I understand they have special needs. So you just have a center in Vladivostok. So, but still, the victims are there and they exist. What happened to those victims and that exceed 6? So they are not in Vladivostok. What does Russia do with these people?
Our officials, they say that victims of human trafficking, they can apply to hospitals or polyclinics according to their place of residence, and they can go to other centers. But the problem is, as we were saying, that they have their special needs, and for that they need a specialized centers. And to have these specialized centers, it is important that at very political level we have a national plan of action or a national rapporteur that would focus efforts on prevention of human trafficking. That's when That's when something is starting to change, and then we have more centers. For example, Russian neighboring countries. Almost all countries in the region, and I mean Commonwealth of Independent States, countries that were former USSR countries, they all have specialized legislation on prevention of human trafficking. They have special acts on providing assistance to victims of human trafficking, not just to victims of any crime, but specifically for victims of human trafficking. Unfortunately, but at this moment in Russia, we don't have any specific legislation for human trafficking and trafficking victims. And that's the problem, why we don't have enough centers, why we don't have a referral mechanism and a system to support these individuals.
Do you think there is, you know, despite you don't have anything, no legislation, no centers for the victims, but do you think there are some movements or some projects or some ideas, anything that has been done in order to walk in this direction, to create any legislation, create any projects in order to act in protection of the...
I have a very positive attitude, and I hope that everything...
You always do, I know.
Thank you, and I hope that it's going to change for the better. We work hard that something changes. I know that there are officials, governmental officials, experts of NGOs that are working hard in this dimension. I know that we have
Do you think it takes for NGOs to convince the government that what is necessary, so they would have to work with the governments to convince them to create a legislation, for example?
I think that all actors should combine their efforts to fight with this phenomenon, because we are all interested to stop human trafficking. And it should be NGOs and governmental organizations, society in general. All Russian public should stand up and fight for prevention of human trafficking and assistance to victims of human trafficking.
What do you think international strategies and practices could be used? You know, because we are talking here about how your government, how the NGOs in your country can help. So, and what about international practices? Can they be any, you know, at any use?
Yes, and for example, Russia is a member state of the Council of Europe, and in the framework of the Council of Europe, there is a convention on action against trafficking in persons. Yeah. It's a very comprehensive, it's a big document, and Russia, even being a member of this organization, did not sign and ratify this convention, but it would be an important step to prevent human trafficking on our territory and to support our nationals who were trafficked abroad. So it's important, and there are some international tools that we could use. There are some very good examples from other countries where we could learn from, and that experience that we could use in our work.
The Russians are trafficked inside of Russia, or or there are people from other, you know, overseas that come trafficked to Russia, or Russians overseas. What is the combination, or are there all the combinations?
In this sense, it's unfortunate to say, but we have all
combinations.
We are a country of origin, which means that we have victims of our own Russian nationals who are exploited internationally. We are a country that is receiving victims of human trafficking or potential victims who are exploited on our territory. Russian territory is also used as a transit point for victims of human trafficking. And unfortunately, we also have a widespread domestic internal trafficking, when people are coming from smaller cities to bigger cities and they get exploited for sex, for labor.
The crime usually happens inside of big cities. They are kept inside of big cities, or it doesn't matter?
Not necessary.
Because I'm just thinking, you know, if you were in a small city that I have lived in small cities, and usually by default you know everybody, you know what happens in every city. So I would think it's more difficult to commit a crime in a small city that everybody knows the neighbor, you know, next door. But
it is also true for Russia, but it is also very hard for victims to come back to their home cities, especially for those victims who are coming from Russian South. We had many victims who were coming from Dagestan, and the majority of people who live in Dagestan and our southern part of Russia, they are Muslims, and it's impossible for them to come back to their home communities. As soon as someone knows that you were exploited for sex, you're immediately considered to be a prostitute, and for those societies it's impossible for you to come back. That's why we're also saying that it's very important that our victims have a right to be moved to other Russian regions, you know, as those acts on protection of victims and witnesses.
A measure of protection. Yes.
Yes. So you have an opportunity to move from your home region and live somewhere else, but at least to have a job, not to be pointed at every time you walk the street.
But also, I was curious to know if these crime organizations, if they act, if they work, if you can say that's a work, but they work hard, you know, and you say that they are fast. So if they act just within big cities, so they keep their victims inside of big cities, or they also can do and act inside of small cities. I know that they recruit inside of, even in small cities, with all sort of promises, job, or even now that the culture of beauty is so strong in our world. So probably promises to young, beautiful girls that they're going to be taken to Moscow or big cities and they're going to become models. So I know they can recruit in small cities, but I would like to know if also they can have a headquarter inside of a small city and have a prostitution center or a labor center in, if I don't know if that would be a appropriate word, but a labor or a prostitution center inside of a small city.
Well, there are some investigations and studies to understand the scheme of human trafficking, and there are cases when victims are brought to big cities, but they not necessarily live inside the city. Sometimes they live in the suburbs, but they being brought every day, let's say, to work, to provide sexual services, forced sexual services. There are instances like that. Sometimes they are kept in private apartments or brothels, and they have no freedom of movement at all. They just stay in those apartments, and clients just coming and going. And that is happening on a daily basis. Daily basis, yes. What about the trafficking schemes? They could be very different. Sometimes people could be recruited and then transported to a bigger city and they stay there. Sometimes recruiters would target those who already involved in prostitution. For example, those girls who provide sexual services, they've been approached by traffickers and they say, let's go, for instance, to St. Petersburg. You will earn twice of what you're earning right now. And then a girl agrees, and coming from a smaller city where she has more control over her activities, she knows the clients, she knows what's going on, she can be more protected, although some people would not consider this to be a job where you can be protected at all, but still, at least she knows people there. And then she's going to St. Petersburg, and they literally lock those girls in the brothel. They don't pay them at all. They get 10 clients a day. They are not provided food appropriately. Hygiene kits sometimes not provided for them. So it becomes a nightmare. It becomes a very severe violation of their human rights. Even though that at the beginning they thought that they are ready to provide sexual services, but they never agreed to work for free, to have a number of clients they were never expected to have sex, unprotected sex that sometimes happens, to stay in one apartment for weeks and weeks, not being able to make a phone call and to go out. This is slavery.
Do you think your country welcomes organizations to work in this field of human rights, as well any human rights organizations?
I work in this field for a long time, and I never experienced any problems with the government myself, although this work sometimes can be hard and frustrating, because sometimes you feel like you are hitting your head against the wall and it's always there. But as I said, I'm very positive. I'm sure that things can be changed to the better. And it takes time, it takes efforts, it takes certain courage, but if you continue, if you're strong enough, you will come through. So,
do you think your work has international support?
I think it does, especially now because of the Humphrey program and the opportunity to meet with other fellows, with other international experts. It's been a great time here in Minnesota, meeting with many prominent experts and specialists in different fields, including human trafficking. And I am a part of Minnesota statewide task force on prevention of human trafficking, and it's been a great opportunity for me to meet with local experts. And there are many excellent specialists that work in this field here in Minnesota.
Do you think your staying here in US brought you some more ideas how to work and in order to prevent this human trafficking?
It certainly did. Although I cannot say that the United States has more experience in preventing human trafficking, United States is also staying on the position when many things should be changed and things should be adjusted to victims' needs. But it's been a great opportunity to learn and grow as a specialist. I see many other examples how to work with victims. For example, I visited Arizona on one of the field trips, and I had an opportunity to meet with agencies that work on prevention of human trafficking in Phoenix. And they have some great, amazing programs. For example, they have a program, one of the NGOs that is called Dignity House. They have a special programs for victims of human trafficking that is 1 year long. A 1 year long program for victims. And during that program, they managed to bring them back and integrate them back into the society, to help them get jobs, to help them continue their education or finish their education that was not finished. And there are many successful stories. I believe that these programs of rehabilitation for victims should be long. And that's a great example shown by Arizona State.
You have mentioned that you are a source of human trafficking because you, the Russia provides people, unfortunately, that are trafficked to another places, to other countries, and vice versa. And also, Russia is a transitional space for trafficking. And I would like to know more, if you know these routes, where people come from, you know, to Russia, or where do Russians are taking to?
Well, I can give you a recent case that was investigated. It was a criminal network operating for 5 years, and there were 129 victims identified by Russian investigators. It's only those who were identified, so it could be more victims. Mm-hmm. And it was just one case. And unfortunately, the leader of that criminal network was a lieutenant colonel of Russian military investigation agency, well, ex-lieutenant colonel, but he was able to operate his criminal group for 5 years.
Using his position?
And including using his official position. So this recent case showed that there are routes that are coming from Russia to Europe and Middle East. So people, at least in that case, were trafficked to European countries and Middle Eastern countries. And there were victims not only from Russia, there were victims from Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, all ladies, and they were trafficked for sexual exploitation. And they managed to work for this long. And they generated a lot of money. They destroyed many lives. And the leader got 13 years in jail. The other people who were traffickers, they also were sentenced, and they were nationals of different countries. There was a man from Israel, was a man from Moldova, was a man from Belarus. So from each country from where victims were brought to Russia first.
They were kind of recruiters.
Yes, it was a very organized
a network.
Group,
yeah.
A network that with criminals that would work in different countries, that would transport victims. They were making fraudulent documents. They were making fake passports, IDs. They were sending them to European and Middle East countries, Eastern countries. And as for from where people coming to Russia, the majority of victims of trafficking who end up in Russia, they are coming from former USSR countries, our neighboring countries. Russia, and we already touched upon this. Language, rather transparent borders, proximity to their home countries, all pull factors for migrants. They're coming and sometimes they get exploited. And it's hard to say who exactly exploit them. There are instances when nationals of one country exploit their compatriots on Russian territory. There are instances when nationals of one country, let's say Kazakhstan, they exploit nationals of another country, let's say Kyrgyzstan, and they exploit them on our territory. And we have to stop that.
Oh, they do with the neighbors.
That happened.
When somebody is recruited or even kidnapped from his home country or in a third place, the first few hours are very important. And if it's possible to find the path and track these people in the first 2-3 days, this person has more chances to be rescued and saved. in opposite to the people who are not tracked immediately, and they have more chances to disappear even forever. And I would like to hear from you if this is a fact or is just a myth.
I think that in general you're correct. It's easier to investigate on a hot pursuit. The crime happened and you immediately react, and you're trying to find victims and to stop traffickers. It's the
But
best.
if you have to deal with international borders, you know, U.S. citizen in Moldova or Ukrainian, to not use our countries, you know, Ukrainian in another country like Kyrgyzstan. So it's more difficult because you have the diplomatic situation, you have borders and visas and everything. So probably the international context brings a bonus of difficulty, I think.
It's definitely makes it harder to investigate, because you need special permissions, you need to contact your counterparts in other country, you need to go through Interpol or Europol channels, you need to contact liaison law enforcement officers at the embassies. It definitely lengthens and it makes the process more difficult.
Do you think today the Russia has secured the freedom of expression in your country for the citizens?
I can speak freely, and I can speak about our problems openly, and this is what
without fear.
Without fear being prosecuted, without fear of going back to Moscow and being stopped at the border and saying, no, go back to the United States, you said enough. No,
or worse, being sent to a jail.
Oh yes, go immediately to a prison. I don't have this fear. Fortunately, I don't have it. I can openly talk about our problems, and we have it. And the problem I'm talking about right now, and that I'm trying to advocate on, prevention of human trafficking, is a very delicate issue. It damages image of the country, and I'm sure that I need to continue this work. There are many people who are doing this work, but I believe that we should push our government further to create an environment where our victims receive sufficient support from the government, because this responsibility is a government's, it's a state responsibility to help its own citizens. So yes, I would like to speak more and more on this subject, and this is what I'm going to do while here in the United States and when I come back, because this is my work in Russia.
I want to thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you very much, Katya.
My dear, it was wonderful to hear from you and from your expertise, and I hope everybody enjoyed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching us, and I hope to see you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.